Hello, this is Adam Bernard with AutoPerspectives, and it's time for another news roundup to see what kind of fun stuff is going on in the auto industry over the past week. There were a lot of conferences going on, but there was still some news to cover, so we will start over in China with Xpeng, a Chinese EV startup, and their new perspective on HMI. What you're looking at here is the light-chasing panoramic display, which was recently unveiled. Now, this uses software from Xpeng and it uses hardware from Huawei. If you haven't heard of Huawei, they are the leading phone manufacturer in China. And Huawei is serious about getting into the EV business, working with a number of different automakers. So this is an AI-powered augmented reality display that runs the full width of the windshield. So not just a little display in front of the driver, but something much, much bigger. It's described as using something that combines Huawei's optical algorithms, optical systems, and components with Xpeng's imaging modules and their augmented reality composition engine. It supports all sorts of stuff, including lane level navigation, assisted driving, and safety alerts. The lane guidance actually aligns with the road markings and functions across cities and complex intersections, including rotaries or roundabouts, depending on where you happen to live. There's also a light carpet display which matches the road surface and adjusts for obstacles and slopes. So a lot of smart stuff going on here. This is similar to what BMW showed in the iVision D concept at CES in 2023. But while the upcoming iX3 that we'll see in Munich in September will have, well, basically a watered down version of what BMW now calls Panoramic iVision, the Xpeng system goes quite a bit further. This is essentially equivalent to an 87-inch ultra-large screen in front of the driver with an 1800-to-1 contrast ratio. So a lot of detail, very clear, very crisp. In case you're wondering what vehicle it shows up in, the little SUV that you see set there on the upper left is the G7. This is a compact SUV whose launch is just about around the corner. It will start around $36,000, and beyond this new HMI, it will also use Xpeng's internally developed Turing chip. That's Turing. It is named after computer pioneer Alan Turing, and it is intended to provide, quote, level 3 computing power. So some pretty impressive bits of technology going into this upcoming mainstream product. Next up, we have BMW and getting back into EREVs, or extended range electric vehicles. Now, BMW was one of the first automakers after General Motors with the Volt to launch an extended range EV back in 2013, whopping 12 years ago with the i3 Rex for range extender. An EREV, if you're not familiar, is a plug-in series hybrid. So it is a plug-in hybrid, but it is set up whereby the internal combustion engine that is on board is designed to maintain the battery charge. Batteries then drive the motors, which drive the wheels. So theoretically, at no time is the vehicle driven by an internal combustion engine. The Volt was a little different because at times the Volt engine did engage with the wheels, but that's generally not the way it's supposed to work. And so the EREV allows the vehicle to operate as an electrically powered entity at all time. Most plug-in hybrids, when you hit about 80 miles an hour, the engine automatically kicks in. And with an EREV, you operate it as essentially like you're driving an EV, so you get all that instant torque, etc. This new EREV system from BMW is rumored to debut on the next generation BMW X5 that you see rendered here. You might recall the X5 was BMW's first sport activity vehicle decades ago. The next generation is due next year. It's also being considered for the smaller X3 and the larger X7, all on BMW's clustered architecture, or CLAR. Now, previously, BMW CEO said that their 100-kilometer range plug-in hybrids were a sweet spot for the company, so this represents a pivot. The assumption is that an EREV would have a longer pure electric range than a traditional plug-in hybrid or plug-in parallel hybrid. So this EREV, if they do it, not officially confirmed, but again rumored, would join the new iX5, essentially replacement for today's iX, with BMW's 6th generation EV hardware. It's an 800-volt architecture, and it uses new cylindrical NMC cells with about 20% more power density. This could be especially useful in China, as local automakers are now adding more EREV capability to their EV portfolios. You know, for a while it seemed after the i3 Rex came out and the Volt came out and the Fisker Karma, if you remember that, there wasn't a lot of activity going on in EREVs, and now we're seeing quite a bit of it in Europe and some rumors elsewhere. And in fact, the new Ram charger from Ram, which now is going to precede the electric Ram pickup to market, is also an EREV. So there's definitely quite a bit going on in this part of the market with this technology. And now we'll shift to fully electric with a couple of previews of vehicles that are likely to show up between now and the end of the year. The first is the Range Rover Velar. The Velar, if you recall, slots below the Range Rover Sport and above the Range Rover Evoque. The next Velar is due in the market next year as an electric fastback SUV that targets the Porsche Macan. It sounds like this new Velar is going to be kind of a little longer, lower, and wider than today's Velar. It's reportedly being derived from the scrapped, more car-like Road Rover concept that was developed for the Range Rover brand a few years ago, and that was almost kind of like a tall station wagon for the Range Rover brand. So definitely the most car-like vehicle that they would have had on offer. Underneath the new Velar will be the 800-volt EMA architecture that Range Rover and Land Rover have developed internally, or JLR. This was originally developed as a multi-energy platform to replace essentially the Ford-based architecture that underpins vehicles like the current Land Rover Discovery Sport, but they decided to pivot and make it a full EV architecture instead. This platform will also source the next Evoque and the upcoming Defender Sport, which would become the entry-level Land Rover type vehicle. Also expected later this year is the next generation AMG GT4 four-door coupe. Long-winded name for a very fascinating vehicle. This would replace the current internal combustion model with a full EV, and this would be the first entry off Mercedes' brand new 800-volt AMG.EA electric architecture. Obviously, nobody develops an architecture just for one vehicle, so Mercedes-AMG are looking to get the full usage out of this by developing a high-performance SUV and the next generation of AMG sports cars. So the AMG GT Coupe and the AMG SL would also come off this platform at some point. If you look at the rendering there in the bottom left, you'll see kind of a three-pointed star graphic in the front headlamps. Those graphics are expected to show up at the tail lamps as well, be quite prominent for the AMG variants here. The new AMG 4 will target, of course, the Porsche Taycan and the Lotus Emea, and it will use new performance-oriented axial flux motors from the UK-based firm YASA, which was acquired by Mercedes in 2021, for the express purpose of developing motors for their high-performance electric vehicles. Axial flux motors, compared to the radial flux motors that, frankly, almost everyone else uses, are compact, efficient, lightweight, with better heat dissipation and higher power density than radial flux motors, so ideally suited to a high-performance vehicle. It's expected that this GT four-door would launch with a two-motor 958 horsepower variant, but a tri-motor variant with about 1,267 horsepower, which puts it up there with vehicles like the Tesla Model S Plaid and the Lucid Air Sapphire, is also a possibility. The very similar Mercedes CLS will continue as an ICE vehicle with the plug-in hybrid option. So I always thought the AMG GT four-door and the CLS were kind of sitting on top of each other in the Mercedes showroom, except for some obviously higher performance variants for the AMG version. But now there's more separation of these two products. In the upper right there, you see the AMG Vision concept, which was a preview for the production version. The production version could be shown as early as this month, and then go on sale sometime between now and the end of the year. So we are awaiting more information on that. Obviously, the EV market is not as strong as it used to be, and we've seen Porsche suffering as a result. Fortunately, this is not a high-volume core model for AMG, and they're still offering internal combustion high-performance vehicles as well. But you know, the architecture is already pretty well far along, so kind of difficult to scrap it at this point. And the good news is they are getting a fair amount of use out of it if the plans continue as expected. And finally, we are celebrating a birthday. The Chrysler brand is now 100 years old, which unfortunately is leading to a lot of discussion about whether this brand can be saved. You might recall that former Stellantis CEO Carlos Tavares gave the brands a deadline to the end of next year to prove their worth. When Fiat Chrysler and PSA Group merged, Carlos Tavares said, you know what, we are not going to kill any brands. And in fact, they even decided to resurrect essentially some brands like Lancia. And at this point, there seems to be too much on the plate. It's unclear if their new CEO, Antonio Filoso, plans on sticking to that schedule. but the current state of the Chrysler brand, which, just as a reminder, is currently limited to exactly one product, which is the minivan, it makes you wonder whether or not there's a future there or not. Here's what we do think is currently on the plate for the future of Chrysler. There will be an update to the Pacifica and the Voyager minivan. There will be an electric variant as well. A new crossover, probably a mid-size entry of some point. It was supposed to be inspired by the Airflow concept, and that's that white vehicle you see there on the upper left. I was a fan of the Airflow concept, but for some reason, Chrysler came out publicly and said, you know what, we're working on a crossover, but that's not it. And I don't really know why you would have scrapped it, because obviously you lost time and spent extra money to shift the direction at some point. It's not clear yet if this new crossover would be a 2-row or a 3-row, although you could probably make the argument that Chrysler could probably sell both. And then more recently, a larger sedan, likely a mechanical twin of the Dodge Charger Daytona, and inspired by the Halcyon concept that you see here, could resurrect the 300 name. So, I don't know, 300N, 300P, E300, something like that. But Chrysler CEO Chris Fuel has said that this is in the works. And then finally, Stellantis design chief Ralph Gilles told Automotive News the Chrysler future includes the Stella Medium platform. The 3 vehicles I've talked to you about so far are all likely candidates for Stella Large. If Stella Medium is included, that means there's probably a smaller Chrysler en route, perhaps a compact crossover or hatchback that would be the entry-level vehicle for the brand. Chrysler doesn't have its own dealer network, so it could theoretically stand alone with a 3 or 4 product portfolio. Certainly better than just having one product right now. So you have the economies of scale of using Stella Large and Stella Medium. You've got multi-energy capability because Chrysler is now, like many other brands, backed away from doing a 100% electric portfolio. So if the plans that I just talked about actually come to fruition, could suggest that the brand has a future. To their credit, they recently announced that there are now dedicated sales and marketing staff, and there is a dedicated design studio for the brand. You generally don't do that if you're about to pull the plug. So it sounds like Mr. Filosa believes that Chrysler has a future. I was a fan of the 300C when it came out 20 years ago, believe it or not. And so I'm hoping that Stellantis can figure out how to make this work. I know that supporting brands takes money, but hopefully they can figure out a way to keep these brands differentiated and relevant in today's automotive market. And that about wraps things up for this week in the industry. If you like what you see and heard, please share, please subscribe. And if you want to learn more about AutoPerspectives, please visit us at AutoPerspectives.net. And I will see you again next week. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.